Is Marvin Harrison Jr. a must draft for the Cardinals in 2024? Let's discuss.
You are Locked On Cardinals, your daily Arizona Cardinals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Cardinals, your team every day. Alex Clancy here. Follow me on Twitter at Clancy's Corner. Follow the podcast at Locked On AZ Cards. Thank you for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen each and every day, wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. We're inching closer to that 3K goal before the start of the 2023 NFL season. If you don't subscribe already, please go search Locked On Arizona Cardinals on YouTube. Hit subscribe. Turn notifications on. Hit a like on this video. Just here to be here for you, be a mouthpiece, just discussing the Cardinals, good, bad, indifferent, ugly, pretty, whatever it may be. And, I was trying to think about what to talk about today. And I have a list of things and, can talk about player development, can talk about the rookies, done that, can talk about big picture, I've done that. And, I vowed for the most part to kind of table the Kyler Murray or Caleb Williams talk. I just think it's too early. And I did talk about it a little bit. That content needs to be out there from this podcast. I completely understand that. But overall, it doesn't really matter yet. And there's so many different things that come into play as it pertains to the Cardinals roster as a whole. Obviously, Kyler Murray is a huge integral part of that, but he's injured. So we don't know when he's going to come back. We don't know what the Cardinals' record is going to be like when he does come back. We don't know how well Clayton Tune's going to play. We don't know a lot of things. And that's not to say that Clayton Tune's going to take over the mantelpiece and be the starting quarterback for the future. There's just so many question marks that you just have to disclaim everything when you're talking about it. Well, if this happens, then this. Well, if this happens, then this is the right choice. We have no idea. So let's table it. Now, when it comes to Marvin Harrison Jr., should he be a no doubt about it draft pick for the Arizona Cardinals if they have 2 picks in the top 5? I'm going to hit that in a minute. James Conner. Not hugely fond. National media is not hugely fond of James Conner. And I've got some numbers and I've got an idea as to what the future for James Conner and the Arizona Cardinals should be. And then finally, the wide receiver room as a whole, again, Pro Football Focus ranked in one of the worst. I think that's obvious. But diving into it, I'm not going to react to an article which speaks in obvious. But when molding this team for the future, the wide receiver group is going to be obviously a massively important part of it. So I'll hit that in the third segment. Should Marvin Harrison Jr. be a must draft for the Arizona Cardinals in 2024? I don't know. And let me unpack, okay? It's easy to say, yes, 100%, whatever happens, he's got to play another full season, okay? Up until the beginning of last season, Jackson Smith-Njigba was the star of the show. He gets injured early on in last season. Marvin Harrison Jr. really just catapults to the no doubt about it number 1 wide receiver coming out next year. He's got to play another full season, man. So again, in a vacuum, if he replicates what he did last year, yeah. And especially if the Cardinals have 2 of the top 5 picks and you want to keep Kyler Murray, you trade back 1, you draft Marvin Harrison Jr. But here's the thing. If he has an average year this year and a team he is trade-upable for, as I make up vocabulary here on Locked On Cardinals on a beautiful Thursday afternoon, he's trade-upable for. So if somebody offers you 2 firsts and a second for a wide receiver, it's got to be discussed. So when I say he's a must draft, it's like, if you know he's going to have a Calvin Johnson career, just draft him at 2, draft him at 3, whatever it is. But I think it's a little too soon just to say, draft him. Don't even worry about what happened in 2024. Just draft him. Worked with Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase sat out a year, came in, and he's been gangbusters. Okay? He's been great. And with a roster that is so fluid, malleable, amoeba-like right now with the Cardinals, you don't really have any strengths aside from Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson if Budda Baker does in fact get extended. And if you want to know what I think about that, listen to Monday's podcast. With the fluidity in place for the roster, we're witnessing a total just renaissance, a total just transformation of an organization. So we don't know what's going to be needed come 2024. Michael Wilson could come and ball out this year. Hollywood Brown could really solidify himself as a wide receiver one. Rondo Moore and or Greg Dortch could come in and be that slash guy, the quick twitch guy, and be a wide receiver too. And if the Cardinals have a wide receiver group, that's fine. And then you go into free agency with maybe a veteran receiver. I'm not saying that you don't draft him. I think that's dumb. I would never say that. But to say that he needs to be one of their picks in the top 5, I just think is being lazy. So many things need to happen in an effort to figure out what the Cardinals need. They need everything right now. And I've talked a lot this offseason. I'll continue to talk about it. This is how I verbalize this. The Cardinals need to figure out this year which players are going to save them draft picks in 2024, which position groups are going to be all set, because they most likely will have 2 of the top 5 picks in the 2024 NFL draft. And regardless of Kyler Murray, the Cardinals need to figure out who will be stars. So say Zaven Collins really takes another step. Say BJ Ojulari takes a step. Garrett Williams is a star right away. You don't have to draft a corner. You don't have to draft an edge rusher. You don't have to draft these things. You don't have to draft an offensive lineman. Say Paris Johnson Jr. plays well, and then they want to part ways with DJ Humphries and find a right tackle for the future, find a center for the future. If John Gaines doesn't work or whatever veteran they place there in week 1, and there's an offensive lineman there in the top 5, and the wide receiver group's better than the offensive line group, there's so many things that could happen that would be roadmaps to the Cardinals not drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. There's way too much up in the air right now to really substantiate an argument where it's like, no doubt about it, must happen. Now, this is barring injury. This is barring anything with Marvin Harrison, which you never hope, obviously. But with how, again, fluid the Cardinals are right now, roster-wise, talent-wise, allocation of talent, experience of that talent, a lot of the Cardinals players on the roster were drafted because of what they did in college, not what they did in the NFL. Obviously, that's how rookies come in. Thank you, Bill Nye the Science Guy. What 2023 is for is checking boxes. Okay, this position group is set. We're ready to draft for depth and not for need. So say Kyler Murray plays 8 games and they win 4 or whatever it is, and they start 0-8, 0-7, whatever it is. There's so many different things. And the Cardinals get the number 1 overall pick or number 2 overall pick. They're like, you know what? Kyler Murray's the guy. Then it kind of changes things a little bit. You trade back from whatever top pick you have, and you can draft an offensive lineman, an edge rusher, and then a wide receiver later in the second round. They're going to have a bevy of picks. So while the choose your own adventure portion of this is starting to form, and I talked about choose your own adventure where Monty Osborne coming in like, all right, kid, go ahead. Whatever you want to do with this roster, because there's no clear direction on what this roster is going to look like for the future. Okay, you want to draft offensive line in the first round? Cool. You want to draft an edge rusher in the first round? Cool. You want to draft, whatever corner in the first round? Cool. It doesn't matter. And what Monty Osborne did was they had their positions that they wanted to draft, and they were able to trade back in the first and second round and get guys that could be starters and stars this year while getting draft capital for the future. So is Marvin Harrison Jr. a must draft for the Arizona Cardinals in 2024? No. Should they draft him? Like, is that a thing where it's like he's going to be the type? If he replicates 80% of what he did in college this year, it's going to be difficult to say that they shouldn't draft him. But just keep in mind when we're talking about this, there's so many things that need to fall into place to show who the Cardinals are as a team before putting, a flag in the sand saying this is a must draft guy. Locked On Cardinals, your team every day. James Conner's getting disrespected, and the pivot that could come after this season for James Conner could be one that could extend his career, hopefully with the Arizona Cardinals, for the next handful of seasons. I'll tell you what that is as we roll on here, Locked On Cardinals, your team every day. This episode of Locked On Cardinals is brought to you by FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. I mean, I'm not sure they can get much better than that. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to be the first home run. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Alex Clancy, Locked On Cardinals, your team every day. Thanks for hanging out. Everydayers, thanks for being around, hanging out with me since 2017. If this is your first time listening to Locked On Cardinals, thank you. Make tomorrow your second listen. Why the hell not? I promise you many things on this podcast. One is I mean everything that I say. I don't say anything for clickbait. I don't say anything for follows. I don't care about follows. I don't care about it. I like to do an honest podcast where I talk about this team in a objective and respectful way, but I won't say things that I don't think are true just to make a positive out of what is a negative. And it's been difficult over the last handful of seasons during the second portions of it specifically to be able to spin that. But what the Arizona Cardinals have now are possibilities. That's what they did not have over the last handful of seasons. There was a restrictor plate on this organization with Steve Keim and Cliff Kingsbury as GM and head coach respectively. There was a ceiling, and now that ceiling has been removed. And let's see what first-year head coach Jonathan Gannon, first-time offensive and defensive coordinators and Drew Petzing and Nick Rallis, and first-time GM and Monty Ossenfort can do with a roster that doesn't have a whole lot of talent right now, proven talent that we've seen on an NFL field. So while it's fun to look towards 2024 a bit, 2023 is still upon us. And I'll tell you what, I'd much rather have the Cardinals find out about these players and potentially have to give up a top 5 pick by winning 7 games to really see what the future of this organization is going to look like. I do. I mean, I just don't think, okay, so hopefully they go, 1-16, and then you can draft Caleb Williams because Caleb Williams is going to be a star. No, we have no idea. We have no idea what's going to happen. We have no idea if he's going to be a star, okay? So the only thing you can do is look towards 2023 and see how can the Cardinals best position themselves for the future, because they're not going to win this year. They're not going to win a playoff game this year. They're not going to make the playoffs, whatever it may be. It's a feeling out year. Success and growth for the Arizona Cardinals in 2023 is in no way directly correlated to their win-loss record. It's player development. It's coach development. It's team building. It's culture shifting. It's foundation strengthening. That's what 2023 is. And that's not a moral victory conversation. That is a true way to build a successful organization. And the Cardinals have been severely lacking in that, realm since the beginning of the Cardinals organization. I know they won 60 years ago. Who cares? The Arizona Cardinals can win with Michael Bidwell as the owner. It just got to be from Monty Ossenfort down. One of those cogs, somebody who's become an honorary, quote-unquote, Arizona Cardinal, is James Conner. Okay, an honorary Arizona Cardinal. I talk a lot about how the Arizona Cardinals don't have a lot of Arizona Cardinals on their roster. Drafted, second contract, stars. Steve Keim decided to just go outsource talent because he couldn't draft. And the Cardinals have turned into a transplant organization, just like the city in which they play, which is very difficult to build a culture surrounding when it's a bunch of different players from a bunch of different teams. And that's where we're at. Okay? So, with James Conner really ingrained himself with this organization. Okay? had 15 touchdowns in his first year, was the star of the offense. And it's something that, you know, they overused James Conner because they figured out during the second half of the season that James Conner was the only real way to move the ball down the field with DeAndre Hopkins hurt. And when it comes to James Conner for the future, I see James Conner as a guy who could turn into that LeGarrette Blount role. Okay. I use LeGarrette Blount a lot because he's won Super Bowls. What does LeGarrette Blount do? What did he do in New England? What did he do, in Philly? Bleed clock. Bleed clock. Eating time. Up 10 points in the fourth quarter, LeGarrette Blount's getting the ball 12 times. 4 yards a carry, first down, bleed clock, win games. It's like having a solid half-court offense in the NBA playoffs. You need to have it to win games. If you're up 6 with 2 minutes left, you need to have a half-court offense to be able to run. And when it comes to the Arizona Cardinals and James Conner, that's got to be it. So we'll see what happens with him this year. I think there's a team out after this year. I think having James Conner play for the next 4 years with the Cardinals, maybe at a 40% clip if they can find a starting running back, and he could be that closer for them because he does have a nose for the end zone that a lot of NFL players don't have. James Conner has a nose for the end zone. He's incredible inside the 5-yard line, which is very difficult to score touchdowns. He does it seemingly with ease compared to other running backs in the league, some other running backs. Having James Conner be a part of the arsenal for the Cardinals for the next handful of seasons in some form or fashion, when pivoting to that closer role after this season, I think would pay huge dividends for the Cardinals. I think would pay huge dividends for James Conner. And I think would pay huge dividends for the Cardinals scoring a lot of points when they start to get good again from 1 to 53 on game day. James Conner, regardless of what happens this season, barring any sort of catastrophe, and hopefully that'll never happen to any NFL player, I think the retention for James Conner after this year, even on a 1-year basis, year-by-year basis, I think would be paramount for the Cardinals because he can be that closer. Touching the ball 30% of the time if you can find a star running back to take over the bulk of the load and, short yardage, things like that. He is an absolute killer in specific spots, and he's still got a lot of juice left in the tank. So I think with James Conner, even though he's ranked towards the bottom, it doesn't matter. Efficiency, he had more yards per carry last year than he did in 2021. Okay. He had about 1,000 yards total with catching, with receiving and rushing. He had a handful of touchdowns. I think he had close to 10. In a bad year for the Cardinals, that is not a bad year for a running back. For an RB1, sure. But for an RB2, maybe getting 70% of those carries, but upping the touchdowns like he did in 2021 due to short yardage and other specific situations where he could thrive with fresh legs. I think having him be an Arizona Cardinal for the next 3 or 4 seasons after this year, barring, him still wanting to play, would pay huge dividends for the Cardinals as he pivots into that closer role that I think he should. Locked on Cardinals, your team every day. The wide receiver group is interesting also. I talked about it a little bit last week. I want to get more in depth now because that's really, when I talk about saving draft picks by players performing this year so the Cardinals don't have to use top picks on those specific positions next season, the wide receiver group and the cornerback room are the two biggest groups where the Cardinals could save draft picks if the players on the roster right now perform. The wide receiver group specifically has talent there. How do the Cardinals maximize that talent when there's not a lot of big wide receivers in that wide receiver room, even though it's full of talent? I'll hit it next. Locked on Cardinals, your team every day. Locked on Cardinals, your team every day. Alex Clancy here. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for making Locked on Cardinals your first listen. Free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. The wide receiver room is fascinating for the Cardinals. 3 guys under 5'10 with lightning speed. I call them the Teslas. Hollywood Brown, Greg Dortch, Rondale Moore. When healthy, Rondale Moore was a vision last year. Greg Dortch, when Rondale Moore wasn't healthy, when he got his targets, was a vision last year in his role. And Hollywood Brown during the first 6 weeks was a wide receiver 1 with DeAndre Hopkins out for PED suspension. He was. So we've seen flashes of all three of these young men at their peak, and it's awesome. It's sexy as hell because they can all play outside. They can all play inside, and they're all lightning quick. So when you talk about the future of this organization, the wide receiver room, it's fascinating to me because, sure, they drafted Michael Wilson in the 3rd round this year, okay, out of Stanford. He's big. He plays outside. They brought in Zach Pascal, who's, he's a journeyman wide receiver 4/wide receiver 5. It's a little bit bigger. But if you can get, there's no rule that states that an area that a wide receiver has to be over 6 feet to be successful. There's no rule that all wide receivers can't be under 5'11" and all be successful. It's how you use them. And with Kyler Murray coming back, Kyler Murray is known for, like, Cliff Kingsbury underutilized Rondale Moore, underutilized Greg Dortch, and Hollywood Brown with DeAndre Hopkins on the shelf, or during the first 6 weeks, he got wide receiver 1 targets, and he balled out when he got those opportunities. So when you're looking at 2023 and what's set to be kind of a throwaway year for the win-loss record and perspective, finding how good these wide receivers can be in this new offense, regardless of who's quarterback, is going to be massive dividends one way or the other for the Cardinals. Whether it be there is a massive hole that needs to be filled by a Marvin Harrison Jr. or a free agent wide receiver going into 2024, or they're like, you know what, kind of set here. Not to say that they shouldn't draft Marvin Harrison Jr. That's not what I'm talking about, but doing your due diligence and watching the 2023 season before saying this must happen or this must happen, which is dumb. Do your due diligence, watch, and if you can find Hollywood Brown truly being a bona fide wide receiver 1 and Rondale Moore and Greg Dortch splitting those wide receiver 2 duties and Michael Wilson potentially overtaking all 3 of them if he has a good year this year, who is a big guy who plays outside, crazier things have happened. We've seen great flashes. We've seen Pro Bowl flashes from Rondale Moore and Hollywood Brown. Rondale Moore in small servings, so small serving sizes. But Hollywood Brown, 100%, you've seen Pro Bowl performance from him. This isn't like one game. This is a handful of games. Rondale Moore looked great last year when given the opportunity when he was healthy. Greg Dortch, when really given the opportunity last year, he showed flashes. Can run the route tree, can play inside, can play outside. They're undersized. Yes. Does that mean that those 3 can't perform as wide receiver 1s and 2s with Michael Wilson to boot? No. The Cardinals could be set at wide receiver if they're healthy. They could be. Could you always be better? Of course. We're going to find out one way or the other in 2023 what the wide receiver group is for the Arizona Cardinals. And that's fantastic because there's not an anchor like DeAndre Hopkins. There's not an anchor like Larry Fitzgerald. There's a new wide receiver 1 spot open for the taking. If Hollywood Brown doesn't take it, maybe Marvin Harrison Jr. does. If Hollywood Brown does take it and Rondale Moore and Greg Dortch and Michael Wilson follow, you may be able to get 2 first-round picks and a second for Marvin Harrison Jr. and allocate your draft capital elsewhere. It's just a fun thing to discuss, fun thing to talk about, and that's why I love talking about it. Alex Clancy, Locked On Cardinals. I will talk to you tomorrow.